and over to you.
Thank you very much, Chris. And this is my third time actually talking to the Ross Carbery Society. The other two have been kind of, I suppose, quite hefty subjects. One on the children's grave, burial grounds, and the other on the Reverend Spring and his mission to Cape Clear. But I think tonight is probably the bravest because I'm coming to Ross Carbery, the land of St. Faulkner, and I'm going to tell you to dump him and adopt Naomh Ciaran. So if I get out of this alive, I'd be very happy. Uh, Tonight is a bit more light-hearted than my other talks, as you may guess from my opening comments. And I don't claim to be an expert on early church history, but St. Kieran is a guy, I suppose he has haunted me a long time. When I was a national school child back in Kilcoe, I won't say how many years ago now, he was probably one of the first historical figures I came across because we learned that St. Patrick never came to West Cork. Instead, we were converted by Naomh Ciaran from Cape Clear. And as a young, proud West Cork man, my chest went out another little bit and doing that. So he's always been there in the background. And over the years, I've kind of he kept cropping up in things I was doing. So he kind of was kind of saying to me, come find out about me, talk about me. So this is the result of the last couple of years of doing some um, reading research, but also spending a lot of time, an excuse to go on little holidays to Cornwall and to Kilkenny and places and see sites associated with him. So what I'm going to look at tonight, and unfortunately that banner doesn't seem to want to go up, but anyway, is going to look at the story of his life. How did that story develop? Tell it, what does it tell us about the early Christian Ireland? How is he remembered today? And is anything about him true? So he has many names. I gave a very short version of this talk a couple of years ago down in Baltimore, and I was going through all his names. I said it indicates either he's a very important man or he's on the run from the taxman. And I don't know which either. So he's known around here as Naomh Ciaran of Cape Clear of Elan Cleara. He's also known as Ciaran the Elder to distinguish him from Ciaran of Clonmacnoise. He's the elder because he came before Ciaran of Clonmacnoise. Up in Offaly, and he's known as Ciaran of Sayre. Sayre is of the fountain, and I'll explain that later. And then when you go over to Cornwall, because he's also the patron saint of Cornwall and of tin miners, he's known as Piran. And that's because when you go from our Irish over to the Britannic, the C sound is changed to a P sound. So Ciaran becomes Piran. And he's also known in Brittany under another name, Suzanne. So, as I say, on the run from the taxman properly. So, very briefly, his life, and I'll go into this in detail after, but just an overview of his life. He was born on Cape Clear sometime in the late 300s. One of the dates given for him is 352, but other dates are given from him as well. There are actually 7 different lives of him have been recorded, and each life says slightly different story, but I'll go into that later. He was one of the 4 pre-tradition saints in Ireland. So he came to Ireland before St. Patrick. And he is often given the title Ireland's first saint. He's patron of Ossory, and for those who don't know, I'm sure the Carlow men will know well, but Ossory basically today is County Kilkenny up into West Laois and originating into Western Offaly as well. So basically, if you think of Tipperary, it's the strip of land to the east of Tipperary on the border between Munster and Leinster, often fought over. But he's the patron saint of the Diocese of Ossory. His feast day is the 5th of March, and there are numerous legends and stories with him. And he's often associated with animals, and I will talk about that later. And in some of the accounts of his life, he died, but they said he died on the 5th of March in the mid-500s. One date is 555, And if you think of one of the birth dates is 532, so he does 203 years. Wasn't a bad innings by any means. So his birth and early life. Again, as I said, there are 7 different accounts of his life, and they're often quite contradictory. But I'm going kind of with the classic one here, which says he was born in Cape Clear. As I said, some of the dates there is 352. His mother was from the local Corklee. She was named Lydon. Again, different spellings of her in different accounts. His father was of the Dáil the Kingdom of Ossory, and he was of higher status than her. Again, different names given for him, but generally he's called Lugna in most of the accounts. And there's some corroborating evidence in the genealogies of the Corklee and the Ossories. But a bit like the lives of the saints, those genealogies were written down hundreds of years after the event, and they were kind of to tell a story. So it was very important when they were writing down for the O'Driscoll chieftain that they put in somewhere in the genealogy that Lydon was there, and the same for the kings of Ossory. If you believe the genealogies, there's a small problem. They were born about 100 years apart. So it would be very hard to have children. But again, as I said, those genealogies, while they tell us a story, they shouldn't be taken too literally. We're told that when his mother was pregnant, that she had a dream that a star was falling into her mouth. And she consulted a druid, and he told her that she was going to have a son, and his fame would make him known, his virtue and fame would be known throughout the world. He performed his first miracle as a child, and then he converted, not in Ireland, on the continent. And I'll come back to that later. As I said, there are a number of stories and this is just a translation of a part of one from the Latin into English. It was done by a Belfast scholar in the 1930s by the name of Helen Waddell and illustrated by the Cork-born artist Robert Gibbons. And I won't read through it all, but you can see there that Ciaran, first of the Saint of Ireland, from Ossory, but his father was Lugna, his mother was Lydon of South Munster. He was born in Cape Clear, and how he was this wonderful child that they all marveled at. And the first miracle was that a bird was in a nest and a hawk swooped down and took the bird. And as I said, he was often associated with animals. So he prayed, and the hawk landed the bird on the ground in front of him, and he prayed over the bird, and the bird was restored to great joy. So that was his first miracle. And this is even before he was converted. So we're not quite sure when or how he was converted. Some of the stories say he was baptized in Rome. Other stories say that he studied in Tours in northern France. And at the time, Tours is associated with St. Martin of the Fields, and it was a major Christian centre from the mid 300s on, even though St. Martin died in the 390s, but even when he was alive, he was a major figure in Christian Europe. So it's possible he did in Tours. It's also in some of the stories that he studied in Rome for 20 years and was ordained a bishop by the Pope. Then he was saying after a while, he decided he needed to come back to Ireland and convert the Irish. And on the way back home to Ireland, who did he meet on the continent but St. Patrick? And they got to talking. And Patrick explained that he was on the way to Rome, that the Pope was about to send him to Ireland. And Ciaran got, oh, what am I going to do? I'm going to go home now. And am I usurping you? And Patrick said, no, don't worry. You go ahead. You find a monastery in Ireland and start converting the people, and I'll come along afterwards. And he said, where'll I go? And he said, go to the centre of Ireland where the north meets the south and there by a well you'll build your monastery. And Ciaran said, where exactly? And he said, I will give you a bell. And when you come to the spot, the bell will ring, and there you'll build your monastery. So he came back. Initially, he came to his native Cape Clear. The church in the North Harbour, which is a later church, but is said to be the site of his first church. And if that is true, it was where the first Christian service was ever said in Ireland. After a number of years working around West Cork, he moved to his father's native Ossory, which, as I said, his father would have been quite a high nobleman in Ossory. And eventually, after some incidents, which I'll go through in a minute, he ended up in a place near the village of Clareen in Offaly. And there, lo and behold, the bell rang. And he was on a hill, and down in the valley beside the hill, there was a well. And that's where he built his monastery, Siar Ciaran, Ciaran's Fountain. And that's how he's still known as Ciaran, Siar Ciaran, or Ciaran Siar. After a while, his mother, who was now a widow, joined him, converted, and she founded a nunnery just north in Killines, Kildare. And again, that is true. That is the first nunnery in Ireland, before Bridget. The story then is in Cornwall that after a dispute with a king here in Ireland, he left Ireland, and I'll tell that story a little bit later, and he converted Cornwall and is regarded as the patron saint of Cornwall. So now I'll just go a little bit, hopefully this will work, and of course it doesn't. I think it works here though. Okay. So to just show this on a map, kind of just through this. So these are the sites associated with them. The first lot are here in West Cork, then up in Ossory, and then over to Cornwall. So we'll start. This is his church that some of you may know in the North Harbour in Cape Clear. And as I said, this is probably, if you believe the story, this is the site of the first Christian service in Ireland. And close by, there's a pillar stone and a holy well as well, near the North Harbour, and there's a pillar stone associated with him. The other sites associated with West Cork, nearby in the Skame Islands. Now, there's different interpretations what Skame means, but the generally accepted one is that it's called after Saint Came, who was his brother, and set up the little church here in Skame Island West. At the time, probably the two Skames are one island, and some people even think they might have been, at the time, even connected to Hare Island. Nowadays, half the church has disappeared into the sea. But there was excavations on it, and now it has been secured. And what it showed was that there were burials there, and carbon dated between 430 and 770. So if we take the earlier date, that is going right back to the time of Naomh Ciaran. And the churches are quite unusual. You'll see out at the ends there's these little abutments out, and that was because that's the way they built the original timber churches. And then when they started building stone churches, they built them exactly the same way. So that's why they're there. And that building probably dates from around 800, and it is probably the oldest surviving church in West Cork. Then we come on to the mainland, and Kilcoe, famous nowadays because of Jeremy Irons' Peach Castle, but close to the castle is a site, a medieval church dedicated to St. Coke. And depending again on the story, she was either his foster mother or his wet nurse, but probably his foster mother. And there are a number of stories associated with this. One is that every Christmas night he would miraculously come and visit her and give her Holy Communion. And the other was that she used to pray on a rock outside off the shore. And one day it got quite stormy and she was cut off, but he appeared and walked across and rescued her. So some people also think that Kilcock in Kildare was named after her, but there's a dispute over that. There's another interpretation that was a sister of St. Kevin named Kilcock, but she was certainly an important figure in his life. Then we come to Kilkieran Moor, which many of you would be familiar with. There's an old medieval church or parish, Kilkieran Moor, as it is pronounced nowadays. There's still a little bit of the church there. I know the local people kind of believe that this was the major kind of church centre in West Cork before kind of Faulkner and Rosscarbery took over. And that's why it was known as Kilkieran Moor, the big church. However, there is also a townland just below it, the lake, Kilkieran Lake, and Kilkieran. So I think probably that was where the original Kilkieran was. And then when they moved to the new one, the bigger one, that was Kilkieran Moor. But so there are a couple of other sites associated with him in West Cork. Two out in the Mizen Peninsula, and the first is up here in the townland of, despite the spelling, it is actually pronounced Cashel Lane. And the explanation we're given is Cashel Lydon, which is the stone fort where Lydon was born. That's his mother, Lydon. And then we are a bit more sure of Kill Lane, which is out very near to Barley Cove. There's a big caravan park in the townland now, and that is the Church of Lydon. Again, there's nothing remains there, but in the ridge above it, there is a holy well and a cross slab. It is in a different townland nowadays, and I haven't been there myself, but Amanda Clark, if you go to her website in the West, on the Holy Wells of West Cork, you can see that holy well, but there is no association, at least nowadays, with Lydon and the holy well. The place name is there. And the other one that there's an association with is Kilmoon in Sherkin Island, but we know very little, only that she was a virgin saint, Saint Mona, and she was of the O'Driscolls, and some of the accounts say she was a king's woman of Ciaran, but we know very little else about her. So now we go, after a number of years, he decided he was going to go to Austria. And the first place he went to was up in North Kilkenny. Here's the border between Kilkenny and Laois, near the village of Johnstown, Grangeferta. And you will notice it when you're driving by on the M8, this huge round tower. It's one of the highest round towers in Ireland. And this, we are told, is the first site that he settled in when he went back to his father's native land. And all was going well there. By the way, the church, which was later an Augustinian friary, part it was turned into a handball alley. That's, yeah. So anyway, he settled there. And as I said, he was often associated with animals. And also in the Irish tradition, he was very much a hermit who put himself apart from other people. So we're told while he was here, he had a pet lamb. And the way he used to survive was every day the pet lamb used to go out and people used to attach offerings to the lamb, and the lamb used to come back, and that's how he survived. One day, the lamb did not come back. As you can imagine, there was lamb chop on the menu in a local farmer's house. So he went out looking for the lamb, and the way he found what happened was he was able to talk to the lamb, who was partially digested inside in the man's stomach. So he decided he had enough of this place. These are horrible people. He was leaving. And he headed north because Patrick told him, somewhere between north and south. And he went close to the village of Earl in County Laois. And this is where he settled originally. This is the original settlement. There's a holy bush and a holy well. And later on, for some reason, they moved the church across the valley to another site, and it's still used as a graveyard. And he was getting on fine here until one morning he got up early in the morning and a stranger came by. And he greeted the stranger and how are you and all this and where are you from? He said, oh, I'm from Grange Ferta. He realized this is very early in the morning. He was far too close to the lamb murderers for his own liking, so he had to leave. And went on again.
Definitely on the run from something.
On the run from something, definitely. The next site is just in Offaly. Over here is the town of Rosscray, but there's actually in Offaly, Coolishel. And all that remains now, there's an ecclesiastical enclosure and a holy well, and this is the holy well. He said, finally, I'm away from those horrible people. This is the place to be. He went to sleep that night. He woke up in the morning. What had happened? Somebody had stolen the sandals off his feet. What's the saying to do? Head further north was the answer. So he went up. Oh, I'm going on. Too many. To a site between Burr and the Schliebnu Mountains. And he settled there and lo and behold, it was there the bell rang. And that's where he built his monastery. Are we told that's where he set up his hermitage? And again, he didn't want followers, but they kept intruding on him and it turned into a big monastery. And see now, it is still used actually to this day. There's a Church of Ireland church there, and that's the little church was built in 1844. So still used to this day as a church site. So this is a close-up. So there's a very large ecclesiastical. I'm sorry, I've been suffering a cold the last week and I can't. The mouth is dry. Enclosure. The church is there. There's the remains of a round tower there. Later on, it was taken over by the Augustinians. So there's the remains of an Augustinian friary there. There is just the base of a high cross there. We're told that the panel is of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. Okay, I couldn't see it, but that's what we are told. There was a Sheen and a gig there, which is gone. It is in the National Museum. But also you'll see there's St. Ciaran's Holy Bush and St. Ciaran's Holy Well, which I'll show you later. So and this was a very large monastery, and very important monastery. And just north of here is the Bell's Hill. This is where the bell rang. Then the last site was just north of there is Killyons, where his mother lied on, set up the first nunnery in Ireland. There's nothing really remaining of the site, just the field, so I had no photograph of it, but just to show it to you. A couple of other sites in Ossory. This one is way down in the south of Kilkenny. There's the border with Tipperary or with Waterford, and just east of Mooncoin, there's the site called Rathkieran. And here there's a slightly different story about himself and Patrick. In this story, he is not too happy when Patrick comes to Ireland, and Patrick kind of decides, I'm the man now. And Ciaran says, Johnny come lately, you are not. So Patrick comes to visit Ciaran at Rathkieran, and Ciaran bars the door on him. And Patrick curses him and curses all the people of the area that they will be forever dunces. Have we anyone from South Kilkenny here tonight? My belief is they are of normal intelligence, but we are told that is because Patrick and Ciaran later made up and Patrick lifted the curse. But again, it's a different take, and I think maybe a more truthful take than the other story, and I'll come to that in a little while. The last site I'm going to show you in Ossory is Tulla Hearn, and Tulla is a hill but surrounded by a boggy or marshy area. Nowadays, it's all beautiful countryside, but one time this was all kind of bog and it was a hill. And the Hearn, some said it's dry, but others said it's actually Tulla Ciaran. And this was where traditionally the kings of Ossory were buried. And in the Irish tradition, Ciaran dies in Ireland, in Shir Ciaran, and he is buried here. Again, it's a site with a round tower, a very important site in the later medieval period. There are a couple of own stones there as well. And this was one of the sites. There were a number of patron days throughout Ossory held for St. Ciaran up to the 1930s, or 1830s, sorry, when the Catholic Church decided that that kind of carry-on wasn't, because there were quite rowdy affairs, was to be put into, and that was, but that was one of the sites there was a patron day. In the Cornish tradition, his ending is different. Their story is that Ciaran fell out with a king here in Ireland. Some of them it was saying our King Agnes of Munster. And the king decided he was going to execute Ciaran. And the way he was going to do it was he took him up to the top of a tall cliff, tied a millstone around his neck, and threw him off the cliff. Of course, what happened? God saw what was happening, released the millstone from around his neck, placed it on the water. Ciaran floated down, landed on the millstone, went across the Celtic Sea, and landed here in Perrin Beach on the 5th of March, 490, according to the Cornish people. And this is a little church, probably the oldest remaining church in England. This about the year 800, just up in the sands behind the beautiful beach in Perranport. So he converted the Cornish people in their tradition. He also found tin for them. The story is he had this flagstone that he used to light his fire on, and that had turned black with soot over the years. One day he had this enormous fire, and this silver liquid ran out of it. Tin. Of course, that is the Cornish flag, the black flagstone with the white cross. And here it is, proud and flying over Land's End. So in Cornwall, he is particularly, I suppose, associated with the tin miners and that section of the community, but also he was a patron saint. Number of churches here around just below Newquay and sites devoted to him. More here between Truro and Falmouth. One up here, where is Tintagel gone? Tintagel, which you all know was where Arthur was born, but there's a church, which I'll show you later, devoted to him. Bodmin doesn't have a church devoted to him, but will come in later. And there's a site down here, St. Burian, which again I'll mention later, associated with him. So there his travels. Oh, by the way, in Cornwall, he's remembered as quite a jolly guy who liked the party and liked his beer. And one of the stories of his death was he fell into a well. So there we go. We'll go back to the slideshow. We can find it. So, lots of associations with him, as I said, with animals, lots of reasons why he was associated with animals. Some would say he was like John the Baptist, dressed in rags, and just like John the Baptist was a forerunner of Christ, Ciaran was a forerunner of Patrick. And there are lots of other theories. But maybe he was just good with animals. One of his particular things he was quite good was rising people from the dead. He's very handy to have around. We're told that one stage his sister was killed by wild animals, and he went out and he found the remains of his sister in the field, and he rearranged the bones and rose her from the dead. There is a story, it's quite a long story, so I'm not going to go through it all, about a virgin who was a nun in St. Naidon's nunnery, St. Brunrock, I'd say. There are different spellings and different pronunciations of it. So it's a long story, but she was captured by a local chieftain who took a fancy to her, had his wicked way with her, and then Ciaran saved her. But then the chieftain came and tried to take her back, and depending on the story again, she either died on the spot or fainted, and it looked like she died on the spot, and the king went away. And there's another story about what happened afterwards. But either Ciaran then, either she revived or Ciaran resurrected her, and she went off and formed her own nunnery. But there is a version of that story in Cornwall as well. And they said, no, this is actually how Ciaran came to Cornwall, that when the chieftain came back looking for her, himself and Burrian, as they know her in Cornwall, fled to Cornwall. And that's how he came to Cornwall. So that's interesting, and I'll come back to that a little bit later. And again, there's a lot of association with him, with King Agnes of Munster. And this is one of the things that we often hear the story of St. Patrick converting him, and how he, when he was converting Agnes, that he drove his staff through his foot, and he said nothing. And Patrick said afterwards, oh, why didn't you say something? And he said, I thought it was part of the ceremony. But if you believe the genealogies of Ossory, Ciaran and Agnes were second cousins. They were quite closely related. There's one story of the king had either 7 or 8 harpers who were killed by bandits. And again, Ciaran and their bodies were dumped in a lake. Ciaran went and found the bodies, drained the lake, and guess what? Rose them from the dead. But in some of the stories, it is with Agnes he fell out. That was the king, and it seems again that the king was married, but decided he found a younger woman that he wanted to leave the wife and get the younger woman, and nobody was going to speak against the king. But of course, Ciaran thought this was not on, and he went into the court of the king and stood up and spoke against this. And that's why the king threw him off the cliff. As well as Ireland and Cornwall, he's also associated in parts of Scotland, particularly the Mullaghtyre. This is St. Ciaran's Catholic Church in Campbellstown and the Mullaghtyre. There's also a Kilkernan distillery there. He's associated with Wales, particularly around Cardiff. Our old friend Gerald of Wales, who wrote about the Norman invasion of Ireland, says that when King Henry II was heading back to Wales in 1172, on Low Sunday, which is the Sunday after Easter Sunday, he heard Mass in St. Piran's Church, the early Mass in St. Piran's Church, and that was Low Sunday morning in 1172. And he's associated also in Brittany, particularly along the north coast. There are a number of sites associated with him. Close to Cornwall. So, where do we get all these stories? Well, most of the stories of the saints were originally written down from the late 1100s on. And they were not meant to be historically accurate. Doesn't mean, they were just written for other purposes. And one of them was to inspire the faithful with these wonderful stories. Things like the long age of the saints, like the saints, the early saints must have been like the patriarchs in the Bible, like Methuselah, who lived for hundreds of years. The early saints must have had the same properties, surely. Also, kind of, because there were a number of Ciarans, often they got a bit mixed up. So that's another reason why he had such a long life. But the reason why they started writing him down was this time was it was the period when the parishes and the dioceses as we know them today were formed. And it was very important to get your diocese and to get your cathedral, because they knew that this was kind of something that was going to last for hundreds of years. Basically, we have the same diocese today as were formed in the 1150s. And with diocese, you had a bishop, you had power, you had pilgrims, you had all that. So it was very important to get your diocese. And one of the things was you had to have a good patron saint. And Austria had this incredible story. Saint Ciaran, the first Irish saint, converted Ireland. Oh, who converted the Irish, folks? Saint Patrick converted the Irish. Who was driving these reforms? The Archbishop of Armagh. Who founded the See of Armagh? Saint Patrick.
11th century.
We have a Saint Patrick problem. How did they solve it? Sure, then they meet in the continent, and Patrick told him to go to Ireland before him, and Patrick even told him where to build his church. Patrick problem solved. Also, a lot of the Irish saints end up in Rome for a long period of time. And why did they end up in Rome for a long period of time? Because they're trying to show the authorities in Rome that their guy was faithful to Rome. Very unlikely that Ciaran ever set foot in Rome. But take him to Rome, he gets to meet Patrick on the way home. Problem solved. There is a problem down Cornwall, which we'll come back to in a minute, because in the Irish stories, he dies in Ireland. How was he also in Cornwall when he's dead in Ireland? Okay. So after all that, some of the things we can discount about him. He did not live to be over 200 years. He didn't rise anyone from the dead. And he didn't speak to lambs that were digesting or somebody's stomach. And he didn't float on a millstone to Cornwall. Strangely enough, I think I have an answer there, because a number of saints arrived in Cornwall on altar stones and millstones and stone troughs. And I think it was probably a name of a boat or some kind of a boat. And over time, the meaning of words change. So probably the boat name at the time was something close to what stone. And then after a while, people said, oh, they'd forgotten the original meaning and they all arrived on stones. That's a theory I have anyway. What is probably false, I don't think he ever went to Rome or he met St. Patrick on the continent. So what we can discuss though, was he ever real or was all this just made up? Was he really Ireland's first saint? And did he convert Cornwall? So was he real? Certainly we know there were Christians in Ireland before St. Patrick. So there must have been people who brought Christianity here. So, okay. We know there were connections between Ireland and late Roman Britain, Even the story of St. Patrick admits that. And also the annals and the genealogies do point to, at some stage around the year 400, for some reason, the Kirkcaldy and the rulers of Ossory get entangled in each other. And eventually, actually, in the late 400s, the Kirkcaldy take over the kingship of Ossory, which leads to about 200 years of unrest. So we do know that there is kind of hints that that kind of marriage between Lydon and Lugna could be possible. The other thing, I suppose, when I was doing my research for this, there was an article by James M. Burke in 1809 in the Cork Historical and Archaeology Journal. And basically, he'd gone through everything I'd gone through tonight, and he had the same arguments. And I said, what has changed since? And one of the big things that has changed since is archaeology. And particularly work in Garan, which Billy O'Brien, he might have spoken to the society about his work there and what he's found. And he's dated that site, and it's near Temple Martin, not too far from here, to around 450. And one of the things he found there, it was not only a residence, it was an industrial site. And one of the things they were doing there was smelting bronze. Bronze, you need copper and you need tin. They had copper. Where did the tin come from? Cornwall. So, mid 400s, there was trade between West Cork and Cornwall. They found a lot of pottery in Garans that came from the Mediterranean. Excavation in Tintagel over in Cornwall, roughly the same period, the same pottery. Again, trade was happening between the two areas. The thing that kind of actually, I didn't realize till I read this report, and the report actually is available free online. And he pointed out something that kind of struck me. Naomh stones. The Naomh stones in Ireland, they're mainly in Cork and Kerry, but around the south coast. They're also found in Cornwall, Wales, and Scotland. Does that sound familiar? Where's Ciaran found? The south coast, Cornwall, Wales, and Scotland. So let's think of it, that these is the transfer of knowledge and of language and of writing and stories. The story of Ciaran. And that's just of where the Naomh stones are found around the south. And the arc actually, it's interesting, the arc goes into South Ossory and into West Wicklow, South Wales and Cornwall, and up here in the Mulligan Tar, areas that are associated with Ciaran. So we can say that he was probably a real person. We can say this idea of him being born around the year 400 is quite plausible, and that he was a significant saint of the early church. The debate then is about Cornwall. The case against him is pretty stark, I'm afraid. Cornwall, St. Ciaran, and I suppose the opposite, the conversion of Cornwall, but really Cornwall was Christian back in the Roman times, so it was the re-establishment, I suppose, of the Christian faith in Cornwall. That happened around the year 600. And again, even in the best stories about St. Ciaran, he was dead in 555. So the way the academics have for getting over this is that they said that they knew in Cornwall that Ciaran was an Irish saint. His name in Irish would be Ciaran. And then in the late 1100s, 1193, a guy called Geoffrey Fitzrobert, who was a big noise in the Norman invasion. He was married to Strongbow's sister, set up his estate in Kells in County Kildare, and he invited over 4 canons from Bodmin in Cornwall to set up an Augustinian priory there. And I don't know if any of you have visited Kells and the priory there. Absolutely magnificent site, folks. Well worth a visit. The thing is, inside the car park, there's this little old church that most people ignore as they're going down and seeing the priory. And this is the old parish church, originally a medieval church, reused right up until the mid-1800s. It was dedicated to St. Ciaran of Austria. So what they said was these monks came over from Cornwall, they learned about St. Ciaran, they said, this has to be our man. They sent news back to Exeter, which was then, there was no independent diocese of Cornwall at the time. Exeter was the diocese. The scribes in Exeter took the story of Ciaran in Ireland, added on this story about him coming across, and basically meshed the 2 stories together to form the one story. Plausible. However, something nagging in the back of my brain. Even the naysayer said it's kind of the fact that the 5th of March is the same date, the same feast day in Cornwall. And it seems to have been there a long, long time. And then there's also, it isn't just the stories. As I said, the story about the Virgin Mary Ann Brannock. Tis the stories about Ciaran as well have been transferred over to Cornwall and down into these little villages at the very tip of Cornwall. So it isn't some scribe writing up and joining 2 stories together. It's gone right down into the Cornwall, these traditions, that this is Ciaran, and they're translating, bringing the stories over. And that's, you know, why would they accept the story unless there was something more there? The other thing that bothered me was, why did Geoffrey Fitzroberts bring over canons from Bodmin, of all places? He had no association with Cornwall. They declares his in-laws had no association with Cornwall. Bodmin was a bit of a backwater, really. It was the biggest monastery in Cornwall, but that wasn't saying much in those periods, I'm afraid. It wasn't very old. It was only established in the 1150s. So rather than he bringing them over, maybe they already said, Ciaran's our man, and they volunteered to come over and set up the priory in Kells. And then they sent back the information to Exeter. Perhaps. Before I sum up, a little bit about how he's recalled. And first of all, how he's recalled how we would expect him to be in stained glass and church, holy bells, feast days. He's also the oldest, don't be laughing. He's also the oldest secondary school, Catholic school, is St. Ciaran's in Kilkenny, founded in the 1780s. There's Naomh Ciaran, GA Club in Clarine and Offaly. And I said, in Cornwall, he's known as quite a happy chap who liked his ale, and they have. And he is surfing because it is, after all, Cornwall. I, purely for scientific reasons, when I was over there last summer, I went looking for it, but it seems they only produce it around the 5th of March. So I wasn't able to, as I said, it was purely just for scientific purposes, I wasn't able to do it. Some lovely stained glass to him. I'm just going to, you've seen some of the slides already. I'm just going to go through 2 local ones. And again, if you want to know about local stained glass, have a look at the Roaring Water Journal and Fionnuala Finlay and her work there. But these are two done in the same year by the same company, Murphy Davitt of Dublin. And the one on the left is my favourite one. It's in the church in Ra down near Baltimore. And this, you can see up on top, the hawk and the bird, the bell underneath. And he's a bit of a dude in this. He's kind of, a bit of a 5 o'clock shadow, and he's kind of, you could see him kind of going, my name is Ciaran. Dave Ciaran. The other one, John O'Neill will know well there, is in Cara. And it's shown a different aspect of him, the saintly monk bringing the word of God, and the little others, one is him showing him sailing out to Cape Clear to convert them there. I won't give you any prizes for guessing who did this. These are stained glass by Harry Clark, the Church of St. Mary in Ballinrobe. Absolutely fantastic. Early set of stained glass dedicated to early Irish saints. And it's actually a full length. And if you actually go to his Wikipedia page, you can see the full length. It's a magnificent bit of work. And he's shown here as, Clark showed him as a normally saints are shown as old men with beards. He's shown as this young man because he was the first. He was the earliest, and that was Clark's way of representing the first, the young man. And in the panel in the bottom, there's a, sorry?
We're just going to ask, what church did you say that was from?
This one, the Harry Clark?
Yeah.
It's in Ballinrobe.
Oh, Mayo.
In Mayo, yeah. Extraordinary set of windows. There's a panel underneath, and it shows another aspect of him, that he is here shown as a hermit, praying on his own with his beloved deer, and Hart describes this as monks prying on the saint. And this idea that he used to try to set himself apart, and monks used to come along and join him, kind of against his will. This is kind of interesting, though, that this idea of him as a hermit. And in the 7 and 800s, there was a movement in the Irish church, the Cayley Day. And that's where this idea of hermits became. It was a very austere movement. It was around the time that the Skellig Michael was set up, that you went away, church is called desert, that you went away and you set yourself apart. And some of the historians argue the earliest accounts of St. Ciaran's life were actually written in the 800s, even though they don't survive, but they said, the earliest ones are in the 800s. And if you were writing about a saint in the 800s, how would you describe him? You would describe the ideal saint as a hermit. So again, I think that to me kind of indicates at least that one, the earliest written accounts were of Naomh Ciaran, even though those early accounts no longer exist. This again is the church out in Cape Clear. I'm showing this again because when Naomh Ciaran died, he asked for 3 graces for the Irish people. The first, that every Irish person would have a chance to repent before they died. The second, that Ireland would be destroyed 7 years before the apocalypse. I'm not quite sure how that was going to help us, but we'd be ahead of the queue. We wouldn't have to put up with the Antichrist, I don't know. And the third one was that anyone buried within the confines of the graveyard of his church would go to heaven. Cape Clear, they reckon this is the church. Up in Offaly, they reckon it's here, Ciaran. I reckon get cremated, put half your ashes here. You're sorted. Close by, there's the Holy Well and the Pillar Stone. One of the things I wanted to do when I was doing this was to look at the folklore and see what the folklore was. But unfortunately, a lot of the folklore was contaminated. Contaminated, I mean, in the 19th century in particular, the idea of saints and scholars was a very popular one in Ireland. And there were a number of books, particularly in the late 1800s, brought out about the lives of saints, including this one, St. Ciaran of Ossory by John Hogan. And the priests and the teachers on the island obviously taught the children the stories out of books like this. And when you look at the School Folklore Commission, it's almost a transcription of what is in this. So we don't really know. The earliest mention we have of him in Cape Clear was a Smith's in 1750, and he said there was devotion on the 5th of March, and the local tradition that he was born in Cape Clear and then went on to Ossory. So we know at least it goes back that far, but unfortunately, the School Folklore and the Folklore Commission wasn't that much use. Again, just a couple of churches. The last time I was here, I was talking about Reverend Spring and the church he built in Cape Clear. St. Ciaran's no longer there. The surviving church on Cape Clear, the Roman Catholic church dedicated to him. Up in Tullahearn, where he's buried in the Irish tradition, again, a little church dedicated to him. I just wanted to say, just a lovely feel about it, so I just put it in. It's not used much anymore, just in a Saturday evening mass. It was locked actually when I was there, and I couldn't get in. This is, I mentioned earlier, St. Ciaran's bush near Ciaran. St. Ciaran's stone is here beside the bush, and again, the imprints of the saint's knees are on the stone. And nearby is St. Ciaran's well. Again, not a very inspiring sight. Surrounded by Leylandia and all this, but it's and a big car park outside it. And it seems this is because actually huge numbers still gathered here every year on the 5th of March. But it certainly didn't get, you get some lovely holy wells. I'm sorry, people of Clarine, this was not one of them. This is a site in West Kilkenny, Kilciaran, and is one of there's a group of high crosses called West Ossory crosses, and they're different. They're very early Irish crosses, bit squat, nearly all lattice work and figure rather than pictorial. And the strange thing at the top, some people say it's a beehive, but the local tradition that there's 7 of these, and 'twas 7 brothers who were bishops, and this is a bishop's mitre. No. So again, it's just one of the sites. There's another one of the sites that I didn't visit, and the townland name is a corruption of Tuber Faulkner. And again, showing the links between here to Kirkcaldy, taking the tradition of Faulkner up to Ossory with them. In the back of that site, there's a holy well, Tuber Ciaran, and it is from this area we get the story of Ciaran bringing his sister back to life. The last one in Ossory is hidden away in St. Canice's Cathedral in one of the aisles. It's quite dark. Is the cathedral or the throne of St. Ciaran, and this traditionally was said to be brought from Ciaran into the next site in Ahabo, which was where the Bishop of Ossory was before he moved to Kilkenny. So it is very old, but it doesn't go back to the 4th century or anything like that. This is the beautiful beach in Piranport, where he landed on the 5th of March. This is a little church that I showed you earlier. And it's up in the sand dunes. And this church was built in this format about the year 800. By the year 1100, the sands had basically taken it over. And it was lost under the sands for the next hundreds of years until it was refound in the early 1800s. And the refinding of this church actually caused quite a sensation at the time, because it was recognised even then as probably the first church anywhere in England surviving. And there was a lot of articles, books and everything published about it at the time. The problem was vandalism. Basically, people wanted to come and take a piece of this church. So the doorway collapsed, people were taking stones, and so this railing was put up around it in the 1890s. 1910, they decided they would actually reconstruct the church the best they could and then encase it in this lovely concrete bunker and put in a drainage system in it. It's the most bizarre thing I've ever seen.
What year is it?
1910. And that's how it stayed until 1980. At that stage, by then a large holiday caravan park was beside it. So again, a lot of vandalism. The roofs started giving trouble, but the biggest problem, the drainage system never really worked. They were constantly trying to pump it out. And the council decided in 1980, forget about it, leave the sand, take it again. Obviously, the people of Cornwall were not happy with that. So they did organise petitions to raise money. And in 2014, it was dug out again. And this is how pretty much how it looks today. This is a gathering there on the hundreds of people gather every year on the 5th of March there. That's water, actually. This is my picture of it when I was there last year. A lot of this, like this, the altar was put in 1910. A lot of these abutments were put in 1910. There are bits of the old roof hanging around it. It's surrounded by stagnant water. It was a sad sight, I have to say, to see for such an important site. And I don't know what they can do, but they should do something better. Yeah, you would imagine so. Yeah, it looked and felt what should have been such a, just felt awful. Around the year around the year 1100, they moved the church about 200 meters up, further away from the sand, and this was used for the next 700 years. This was the site of St. Piran Church. It's called Piran Zabule, which is St. Piran of the Sands. And beside it, there is a Celtic cross, a Cornish Celtic cross. The original Celtic crosses in Cornwall came from Ireland, but over time they morphed into their own style and these very distinctive kind of wheel head at the top. 4 holes, but only 3 of them drilled through for some reason. I'm not sure why that is. So that's at the site. This is a picture of the church in the late 1700s. We do know that there were relics of St. Ciaran in this church up to the time of the Reformation, including his head. And we're told in 1433, the local landlord, Sir John Arundel, gave 40 shillings to ensure that the head would be properly enclosed. But the Reformation was quite bloody in Cornwall and no relics remain. Beside it is the rectory. The cross is shown, but strangely it's shown as a Latin cross rather than the Cornish one. You'll see there are a couple of very happy bunnies because of the sand again is encroaching. And around the year 1800, they abandoned it and moved 2 miles inland. So St. Piran of the Sand is now 2 miles away from the sand. This is the church was consecrated in 1805, still in use. The tower they took down from the old church and rebuilt it. So that is from the second church. As I said, there is a church dedicated close to Tintagel. This is it. It's built in the late 1400s. Again, however, during the Reformation, it was shut down and turned into a barn. You can see the maps here in here where the big doors are put in for the barn. In the 1940s, a local curate bought it back and turned it back into a church, and it's still used as a church to this day. A little bit of damp, but very beautiful and actually a lovely site. And across the road from it, St. Piran's Holy Well. The last site I have from Cornwall, just to show that he is still remembered in Cornwall to this day. This is the Catholic Church in Truro. It was built in the 1960s. When I arrived there in the evening, it was about 8 o'clock in the evening, so the gate was shut in front of me, so I couldn't get in. But you can see the picture of Piran with his millstone and his Cornish flag. All I can say to you folks is he's not an architectural gem by any means. Hopefully inside it is more beautiful, but I couldn't get in. So I kind of said I want to show it in because I said part of my discovery was to visit these sites and see, do people still recall him to this day? Is there memories of him? And there is. And this image here of him is going to go back to a classic image of him. It is from the Capuchin Annual on 1956, done by Philip King. And you can see he's here, he's with his lamb, pre-digestion. And this panel is him greeting St. Patrick. And then the other one, he's with his bell by the stream or the fountain. It's there, fountain written, so very clever. But after all this, what can we say? Well, what I will say is Ciaran was a real saint. I think there's enough evidence to suggest that somebody like Ciaran existed around the year 400 when there were trading links between this area and Cornwall. Somebody of his stature would have gone over to Cornwall on one of these trading links. There might have been a bit trading, a bit raiding, but heard about the Christian religion, was converted, perhaps went over to Tours and studied for the priesthood, and then came back to Ireland, initially to this area where he was born, and then up to his father's country in Ossory, and converted him. And that he was a major saint in the early Irish church and was revered as such. 150, 200 years afterwards, when Irish monks like Columkill and Columbanus went out into the world, they took with them stories of Naomh Ciaran, this wonderful, the first Irish saint. Of course they did. They built churches dedicated to it. The story particularly resonated in Cornwall because he might have been converted there. Over time, it got a bit messed up. And rather than people in Cornwall and Wales and Scotland decided it was Ciaran actually came over and converted him, it wasn't Ciaran. It was his disciples or his descendants' disciples 100 years or so later. So it was Ciaran Asser they were venerating, but he wasn't actually there. It was a story of him. So if he was one wonderful saint, why isn't he a much bigger name today? A lot of it came down to that process, as I said, in the 11th, 12th century of forming dioceses. And around that time, the cult of St. Patrick took over. And it almost became heresy to suggest anyone other than Patrick converted the Irish. And certainly, they didn't want to know about Naomh Ciaran. I read one kind of guy, he was on about Ciaran being associated with King Ignace of Munster. He said, absolutely not. We all know St. Patrick converted him. Do we? St. Patrick was a bit like an ice agent. He had no body cam on him. We don't know exactly where he went, what he did. Perhaps Ciaran converted him. But it wasn't politically correct anymore for anyone other than Patrick to convert a king. Patrick in, everybody else out. He wasn't helped either by where he came from in a way, because there was no major centre to him in West Cork. And over time as well, the O'Mahonys came into the Mizzen, where his mother was, and that ended up in one diocese, the Diocese of Cork, whereas Cape Clear and Kilkieran and Moore ended up in Ross. And Ross, at that stage, by the time the diocese were formed, like Rosscarbery, was a well-established centre with its round tower and everything. So, you know, Faulkner had the head start here anyway. So he became the patron. And in Cork, Finbar became the patron. And he was kind of forgotten in his native West Cork. He also had a bit of problem in Ossory, because Sir Ciaran, where his big monastery was no longer in the Kingdom of Ossory. Even today, it is an island parish, totally surrounded by the parishes of the Diocese of Killaloe. And when the first cathedral was set up in Ossory, it wasn't in the Sir Ciaran, it was in Ahabo in Laois, with a site dedicated not to Ciaran, but to St. Canice. Later on, the Normans decided to move the cathedral to Kilkenny. And again, what's the name of the church in Kilkenny? St. Canice's. So again, he was kind of, even though he's the patron of Ossory, he had a rival there. So that didn't help him either. So Ciaran was kind of slipped down the pecking order and was largely forgotten. However, alas, I was Ireland's first saint, exclamation mark rather than a question. How much of this is real? And how much of it is just the wishful thinking of that little boy sitting in Kilcone National School who was so proud when he heard of this story? I don't know, because I can't separate that little boy from this man. But I think it is plausible. And I'm open to any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, William. A wonderful body of research contained in that. So we are very grateful. As William said, he's open to any questions. Anyone has a question?
A comment instead of a question.
Yeah, brief one.
All right, and just, that was very interesting, thank you so much. Forgive me if I quarrel with your pronunciation of the mother of Saint Ciaran. You call it Laidon, but there's no father, and it's Liadin. I think we've the same spelling.
Yeah.
And that in Irish would be Liadin.
Liadin.
Yeah, I'm particularly conscious of it because I once gave the name to a greyhound bitch.
Lead. My apologies for that. Just thank you.
Thank you for that comment.
Yeah. I'm sorry about the greyhound.
Really great lecture and for your enthusiasm. More than usual. Just a question, can we be sure that the St. Ciaran born on Cape Clear is the same one who was up in Singer?
We can't, as I said, we can't be 100% sure. The lives there, as I said, there were 7 lives written in them, and some of them had him born in Leinster. Some of the later ones were written around the time that Ossory and Kildare, there was a dispute over territory, and they were both kind of weaponizing Ciaran for their own ends. But certainly the tradition seems to be going back a long way. As I said, the earliest I can find is 1750, when it said, you know, on Cape Clear that he was born there and that he moved to Ossory. And again, in some of the lives, the very early one I had, which was in Latin, And it recalled that story that, you know, that he was born in Cape Clear and his father was of Ossory and he went to Ossory afterwards. So, and they were written back in the Middle Ages. So even then, that story was there. We can never be 100% sure, but the story has been around for hundreds and hundreds of years.
Just briefly, there was a connection, like a historical connection between Kirkcaldy and Ossory.
Yes,
So that connection was there.
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, but again, like, we always have to be a little bit wary of what is written in those stories. But again, why would they make up a story like that? And it seems that there was this long kind of that the Kirkcaldy king took over the kingdom of Ossory, and there was this long kind of guerrilla style warfare against them, lasting for quite a while. So again, that kind of shows that there was some connection, even though it isn't an obvious, you know, they're put geographically quite apart.
And then just a quick one.
Yeah.
Is the place of his death, was it marked with a stone or a stone or something? The actual place? Where he
No,
died?
there isn't a kind of in Sir Ciaran. They said he died there, and the tradition locally was buried there. As I said, in Tullahearn, they say he was buried there, but there's no kind of this is the grave of. When they first excavated the site in Cornwall, they dug up a lot of bodies, and one of the bodies was inside the church, and he was a man. Well, I think there was a man anyway, of about 7 foot tall, but he was missing his head. And because they had the relic, they knew the relic was there of the head. So there was a kind of an assumption this was the body of St. Ciaran, buried within the church. Which, again, we don't know. Yeah.
Yes, over there.
Yeah.
Our dad, around the property where water and Cape in the late 50s and early 60s, 7 years. And he had the gift of water to mining,
Okay.
and he found St. Ciaran's well in Cape Clear. He had been missing for years, and the priest was wanting him. Dad found it. So
Okay.
He's got no recognition for it, unfortunately, but the Cape people know, you know.
Okay.
the-
Very good.
the boat and all that, they remember that.
Oh, well, very good.
Thank you very much.
Been lost.
Yeah.
Thank you. Nice to know.
Yeah. Yes.
Was there any evidence at all on the continent? It could have been on the continent at any point.
No.
I'm just thinking when you said the old stones and where they were positioned, my head went straight to Brittany.
Yeah, again, there are some churches dedicated to him, Brittany, and there's different names, but often there are different dates associated as well. So the connection to Brittany is very tenuous, to say the least.
The train of thought.
Yes, and there would have been a lot of, like, Brittany and Cornwall would have been very close, so you would expect, you know, that there'd be some knowledge of him in Brittany, but it is very tenuous to Brittany. Yeah.
I was just going to say, I think that the old stones in Brittany and they were Celtic as well.
Mhm.
So, you know, that's the origin of Celtic languages. You know.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, well, again, our sincere thanks, William, as
My pleasure.
always. So you'll have to come up with something else for your fourth visit. But you'll always be welcome back
Thank you.
again.